The orc woman filled his doorway like a storm-given flesh, her green skin slick with rain and blood, her yellow eyes burning with something far more dangerous than rage. Julian Harrow did not reach for the axe by the hearth or the old sword hanging above the mantel, relics from a war he had tried desperately to forget. Instead, he looked at the way her massive frame swayed, at the crimson spreading across her leather armor, at the arrow shaft protruding from her shoulder, and he simply stood from his chair and walked to the cupboard to fetch another plate. She watched him with those fierce eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps that showed the pain she refused to voice. Her hand gripped the doorframe hard enough that the wood groaned, and Julian could see the tremor in her muscular arm, the way her legs threatened to buckle. She had chosen his home, his hearth, as her sanctuary. Whether by accident or design, she had staggered through the forest and found the one cottage for miles, the one human dwelling on the edge of the wilderness where the king's patrols rarely ventured. "You are welcome to sit," Julian said quietly, setting the plate on his small wooden table next to his own half-eaten dinner. Venison stew, still steaming in the pot hanging over the fire. He ladled a generous portion onto the new plate, his movements calm and measured. "The chair by the fire is strongest." The orc woman's tusks caught the firelight as her mouth worked around words that would not come. Her leather armor was well made but battered, marked with old scars and fresh cuts. A warrior, then. Perhaps a raider. Perhaps a scout from one of the clans that still fought the human settlements to the east. It did not matter to Julian. What mattered was that she was bleeding on his threshold, and the winter night was cruel beyond his door. "I could die here," she finally managed, her voice rough and deep, each word shaped carefully around her tusks. "Kill you, take what I need." "You could," Julian agreed, pulling out the chair he had offered. It was solid oak, built by his own hands to support his large frame, and it would hold her weight. "But you would have to get past me first, and I suspect you would rather eat and let me tend that arrow. The poison on orc blades does not work well on humans, but infection cares nothing for species." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. She pushed away from the doorframe and stumbled forward, and Julian was there to catch her elbow, steadying her toward the chair. She was tall enough that even hunched with pain, she stood eye to eye with him, and he was not a small man. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, fever-hot, and he could feel the power in her corded muscles even weakened as she was. She collapsed into the chair with a grunt that might have been gratitude, and Julian closed the door against the howling wind. The latch clicked, sealing them together in the firelight and shadow. His cottage was simple but well built, a single large room with a sleeping loft above, a stone hearth that he had mortared himself, and windows shuttered tight against the storm. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and shelves lined one wall, filled with the modest provisions of a man who lived alone and preferred it that way. "Eat first," Julian said, pushing the plate toward her. "Then I will see to the arrow. You are not afraid." It was not a question, but an observation, spoken with the wariness of someone unused to kindness from his kind. "I stopped being afraid of death 8 years ago." Julian returned to his own seat and picked up his spoon, resuming his meal as though hosting a wounded orc warrior was an everyday occurrence. "Eat. You will need your strength." She stared at him for a long moment, then at the food. Her hand, large and calloused with nails like claws, reached for the spoon with surprising delicacy. She brought the stew to her mouth and ate, and Julian watched the way her eyes closed briefly, the way tension bled from her shoulders. How long since she had eaten? How long since she had felt safe enough to stop running? They ate in silence, broken only by the crack of the fire, and the storm rattling the shutters. Julian finished first and stood to gather what he would need: clean cloth torn from an old shirt, a bottle of spirits strong enough to clean wounds and dull pain, needle and thread, and a wickedly sharp knife. He laid them on the table and met her gaze. "The arrow must come out. I can do it or you can, but it will hurt either way and you will need to trust that I mean you no harm." "Why?" The word burst from her like something long held back. "Why help me? I am orc. You are human. We are enemies. You are injured. I am a healer, or I was before the war. That makes you a patient, not an enemy." Julian pulled another chair close and gestured to her shoulder. "May I?" She searched his face for deception, for cruelty, for any of the things she had clearly learned to expect from humans. Whatever she found, it satisfied some question she had not voiced. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, and turned to give him access to the wound. Julian worked carefully, cutting away the leather armor to expose the injury. The arrow had gone deep, angled down into the muscle but missing anything vital by pure luck. The fletching was crow feather, the shaft ash. Human make from the settlements, so she had been fleeing human hunters, not orc clan warfare. That explained why she had come so far into the forest, why she had risked approaching a human dwelling. "This will hurt," he warned, wrapping his hand around the arrow shaft. "Take a breath, hold it." She obeyed and he pulled. The arrow came free with a wet sound and a gush of blood. She made no sound, but her hand crushed the edge of the table hard enough that the wood cracked. Julian worked quickly, packing the wound with cloth soaked in spirits, cleaning away blood until he could see the damage clearly. No poison that he could detect, but the injury was deep and would take time to heal. "I need to stitch it closed," he said. "The spirits will help with the pain if you can drink. I can drink anything a human can and more." Pride in her voice now, cutting through the pain. Julian offered her the bottle and she took it, swallowing several deep mouthfuls without flinching. Then she set her jaw and nodded for him to continue. He threaded the needle and began to work, pulling torn flesh together with careful stitches. She trembled but did not pull away, did not cry out. Her other hand remained locked on the table and Julian could hear her breathing, controlled and deliberate. "You were a soldier," she said through gritted teeth. "It was not a question. Yes, a long time ago. You have the hands of a warrior, the steadiness." "I have the hands of a man who has sewn too many wounds on too many dying boys." Julian tied off the thread and cut it, then began bandaging the shoulder with clean cloth. "The war took enough from me. I will not let it take anything more, not even compassion for my supposed enemies." She was quiet as he finished, securing the bandage and helping her ease back in the chair. The fever flush had not left her cheeks, and he suspected infection might still set in despite his care. He would need to watch her, keep the wound clean, make sure she rested. All of which required her to stay, and that presented its own complications. "You can take the bed in the loft," Julian said, already anticipating her protest. "I will sleep by the hearth. In your condition, you should not be climbing, but it will be warmer up there and you need rest." "I am Shara Imbertusk." She spoke her name like a challenge, like she expected him to recognize it, to recoil. "Of the Ironwood clan. We have raided the eastern settlements, killed human soldiers. My name is on your king's execution lists." "I am Julian Harrow, and I do not care about the king's lists." He returned the medical supplies to their places, then banked the fire for the night. "You need to heal. Whether you stay an hour or a week, you are safe here. That is all that matters. You truly do not fear me." "I fear what drove you to my door more than I fear you, Shara Imbertusk." Julian gestured to the loft. "Please, rest. We can discuss the future when you are not bleeding through my bandages." She rose with difficulty, and he was there again to steady her, his shoulder under her arm as he helped her to the ladder. She managed the climb with determination, each rung a visible effort, and he stayed close in case she fell. The loft was small but comfortable, the bed piled with furs and quilts that his mother had made before she passed. Shara collapsed onto it with a sigh that sounded like surrender. "Thank you." The words were quiet, almost lost in the storm outside. "Rest well," Julian replied, and descended the ladder to give her privacy. He lay by the hearth wrapped in a spare blanket, but sleep did not come easily. The sounds of her breathing above, the knowledge that an orc warrior lay in his bed, the sheer impossibility of what he had done, all of it chased through his mind like startled rabbits. But beneath the worry was something else, something he had not felt in the 8 years since he had left the war behind. Purpose. The feeling that perhaps he could still do some good in a world that seemed determined to tear itself apart. Morning came gray and cold, the storm having blown itself out in the night. Julian woke to find frost on the windows and silence from the loft. He climbed the ladder quietly, concerned that Shara might have worsened in the night, but she was sleeping deeply, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The bandage needed changing, but that could wait. He descended and set about his morning routine, building up the fire, putting water on to boil, preparing a breakfast of eggs and bread and strips of salted pork. She woke to the smell of food cooking, and he heard her stirring above. When she climbed down the ladder, moving with obvious pain but more strength than the previous night, he had a plate ready for her. "Sit," he said, and she obeyed without argument, which told him how much the injury had taken from her. They ate together as dawn light filtered through the shutters, and Julian studied her more carefully in the morning brightness. She was perhaps his age, late 20s or early 30s by human reckoning, though he knew orcs aged differently. Her face was strong and angular, high cheekbones and a broad forehead, her tusks small and elegant as they curved up from her lower jaw. Scars marked her arms and neck, the history of a warrior written on her skin. But her eyes, when they met his, held intelligence and something like caution. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I was shot with an arrow and then sewn back together by a human who should have killed me." A hint of dark humor in her voice. "Then you feel appropriately terrible. Good. That means you will rest instead of trying to leave before you are healed." "I cannot stay long. They will search for me. If they find me here, they will burn your home and hang you as a traitor. Then we will be careful." Julian collected their plates and set them in the wash basin. "Who hunts you? Soldiers from the settlements, mercenaries, orc hunters?" "There is bounty on Ironwood clan warriors, and I am worth more alive than dead." Bitterness colored her words. "They want to make an example, public execution in the capital." "Why were you alone? Where is your clan?" She looked away, and Julian saw pain that had nothing to do with her shoulder. "I was cast out, exiled. The clan elders said I showed weakness, that I questioned our war against the humans. They gave me 1 day to leave their lands, so I ran west into the deep forest. I thought I could reach the mountains, find sanctuary with one of the isolated clans. But the hunters found my trail. You questioned the war." Julian kept his voice gentle, curious rather than accusatory. "I killed a human soldier in battle. As he died, he whispered a woman's name, his wife perhaps, or his daughter." Shara's hands clenched on the table. "He was not a monster. He was just a man, fighting because his king commanded it, dying far from home. And I realized that we are not so different, humans and orcs. We both bleed. We both love. We both die when someone shoves steel through our hearts." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Julian had seen too many young men die with names on their lips, had held too many hands as the light left their eyes. He knew the weight she carried, the burden of that realization. "The war makes monsters of us all," he said finally. "The only way to win is to refuse to play." "Is that why you are here, alone in the forest?" "Yes. I served my 8 years, survived battles that should have killed me, and watched better men than me die for borders that change with every generation. When my service ended, I took my veteran's grant and bought this land. I built this cottage with my own hands. I live alone because I cannot bear to watch anyone else die for someone else's cause." "You are strange for a human," Shara said, but there was warmth in her voice now, a tentative respect. "You are strange for an orc," Julian countered. "Questioning your elders, fleeing rather than fighting to the death. Perhaps we are both traitors to our kind, or perhaps we are simply tired of the killing." Julian stood and gathered his cloak. "I need to check my traps and gather firewood. Will you be well while I am gone?" "I can defend myself, even wounded." "I do not doubt it, but try to rest. Let your body heal." He paused at the door. "If anyone comes, human or orc, hide in the loft. Do not answer the door. I will return by midday." She nodded, and Julian stepped out into the cold morning. The forest was beautiful in its winter stillness, snow beginning to dust the ground, ice glittering on the bare branches. He walked his trap line, checking snares and deadfalls, and found 3 rabbits and a ptarmigan, enough meat for several days. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Shara, to the impossible situation he had created by offering her sanctuary. He should send her away as soon as she could travel. Every day she remained was another risk, another chance that hunters would find his cottage and see the green-skinned warrior inside. He would be executed as a traitor, and she would be dragged to the capital in chains. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to see her healed and send her on her way. But Julian found he did not want to do the smart thing. Not this time. There was something about Shara that called to the parts of him he had thought dead, the parts that still believed in honor and compassion and the possibility of peace. She had questioned her war, just as he had questioned his. She had paid the price for her conscience, just as he had paid for his. Perhaps they were both traitors, or perhaps they were simply 2 people trying to find a different way to live. When he returned to the cottage, he found her standing by the window, looking out at the forest. She turned at the sound of the door, and he saw that she had braided her dark hair, a complex pattern that spoke of orcish tradition. It suited her, highlighting the elegant line of her jaw and the fierce beauty of her features. "No visitors," she reported. "Though I heard riders on the western trail distant." "The hunters." Julian hung his cloak and set the game on his work table. "Perhaps, or simply travelers. They did not come close. We should be cautious regardless." He began preparing the rabbits for cooking, skinning and cleaning them with practiced efficiency. "If they are hunting you, they will search in widening circles. This cottage is remote, but not invisible." "I should leave tonight," Shara said, but her voice held no conviction. "You should leave when you can travel without bleeding to death," Julian corrected. "Another 3 days at minimum, perhaps 5. The wound is deep and infection is still a risk. You risk much for a stranger, for an enemy. You are neither, as far as I am concerned." He quartered the rabbits and set them in a pot with water, herbs and vegetables from his root cellar. "I made a choice when I opened my door to you. I do not make such choices lightly, and I do not abandon them when they become difficult." She moved closer, studying him with those penetrating yellow eyes. "You are either the most foolish human I have ever met, or the bravest. I am neither. I am simply a man who has seen enough death to know that kindness is rarer and more valuable than courage." Julian met her gaze steadily. "You walked into my home and claimed my hearth as yours. I could have driven you back into the storm, but I chose to set another plate. That choice is made. Shara in Burdusk. The only question now is what we do with it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Julian tended Shara's wound twice daily, changing bandages and checking for signs of infection. She healed quickly, as orcs did, her robust constitution fighting off fever and knitting torn flesh with impressive speed. By the third day, she could move without pain. By the fifth, she was helping with chores, hauling water from the well and splitting firewood with an axe that looked small in her powerful hands. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their lives before the war and during it. Shara spoke of growing up in the Ironwood clan, learning to fight and hunt from her mother, who had been a respected warrior. She described the beauty of orcish lands, the great stone halls her people carved into mountainsides, the forge fires that burned day and night, creating weapons and tools of legendary quality. She spoke of festivals where her people danced and sang, celebrating the turning seasons and honoring their ancestors. Julian shared his own history, growing up on a small farm, the second son with no inheritance to claim. He had joined the king's army at 18, seeking adventure and glory, finding only mud and blood and the screams of the dying. He described battles that had no meaning beyond the egos of nobles he would never meet, treaties signed and broken before the ink dried. He spoke of his commander, Captain Helena Worth, who had taught him field medicine so he could keep his squad alive, and how he had held her as she died in his arms during the Battle of Crow's Ridge. "You loved her," Shara observed one evening as they sat by the fire, the remains of dinner cleared away. "I did, though I never told her." Julian stared into the flames. "She was married and I respected that, but yes, I loved her. She was the finest person I ever knew, and she died because some lord wanted a valley that no one would remember in 10 years. Love makes warriors vulnerable," Shara said quietly. "That is what my clan elders taught. They said to love was to create weakness, to give enemies a weapon to use against us. Your elders were fools." Julian looked at her, seeing the way firelight played across her green skin, turning it bronze and gold. "Love is what makes us strong enough to question unjust wars. Love is what gives us reason to seek peace instead of glory. Your elders feared love because they knew it would make their warriors ask why they were fighting, and they had no good answer to give. You see clearly for a human. You see clearly for an orc." He smiled, and after a moment she smiled back, her tusks catching the light. The moment stretched between them, warm and charged with possibility. Julian felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that what he felt for Shara had grown beyond simple compassion or the satisfaction of healing. She was fascinating, fierce and thoughtful in equal measure, quick to laugh and quicker to understand. She moved through his small cottage like she belonged there, her presence transforming the space from a hermit's refuge into something like a home. "Tell me about orcish music," he said, pulling back from the precipice of feelings he was not ready to name. "You mentioned festivals with singing." Her expression brightened, and she began to hum, a deep melodic sound that resonated in her chest. Then she sang, words in the orcish tongue that Julian did not understand but felt nonetheless. The song was mournful and beautiful, speaking of mountains and exile, of warriors far from home. Her voice was rich and textured, filling the cottage with sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. When she finished, Julian found he had moved closer without realizing it, drawn by the power of her song. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It is the song of leaving," Shara explained, "sung when warriors go to war knowing they may never return, or when exiles depart from clan lands, stripped of name and honor." Sadness shadowed her face. I sang it as I walked away from my home. I thought I would never sing it again, that I would die alone in the forest with no one to witness my passing. You are not alone now." Julian reached out and took her hand, the gesture feeling both impossibly bold and completely natural. Her fingers were warm and calloused against his, her strength evident even in the gentle way she returned his grip. "No," she agreed, meeting his eyes. "I am not alone." They sat like that as the fire burned low, hands joined, two exiles who had found unexpected sanctuary in each other. Julian knew they could not hide forever, that the world beyond his door would eventually intrude. But for now, in the warmth of his cottage with Shara's hand in his, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. One where humans and orcs were not enemies. One where two people who had walked away from war could build something together instead of tearing things apart. The moment was broken by the sound of horses on the trail, multiple riders moving fast. Shara was on her feet instantly, her warrior instincts flaring to life. Julian moved to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. 6 riders, heavily armed, wearing the mismatched armor of mercenaries. They were searching, stopping to examine the ground, clearly tracking something. "The hunters," Shara breathed behind him. "They have found my trail." "Into the loft," Julian ordered. "Hide among the furs. Do not come down no matter what you hear. They will question you. Torture you if they think you are hiding something. Let me worry about that." He gripped her shoulders, meeting her fierce gaze. "Trust me, Shara, please." She searched his face for a heartbeat, then nodded and climbed swiftly into the loft. Julian heard her burrowing into the furs, concealing herself. He took a breath to steady himself, then opened the door just as the riders approached his clearing. "Good morning," he called out, his voice carrying the friendly but wary tone of a man who lived alone and did not welcome unexpected visitors. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader was a scarred man with a gray beard and cold eyes, the kind of veteran who had long since stopped caring about right and wrong and cared only about gold. "We are hunting an orc woman, escaped prisoner. She was wounded, bleeding. Tracks lead into this forest." "I have seen no orcs," Julian said truthfully. Shara had been bleeding when she arrived, yes, but she was no escaped prisoner. The words were honest even if they concealed the truth. "I keep to myself out here. Do not see many travelers. You mind if we search your cottage?" The mercenary's hand rested on his sword hilt, the threat obvious. "I do, actually." Julian kept his voice level. "I am a veteran of the king's army, served my 8 years honorably. This land is mine by right of service, and you have no authority to enter without warrant or cause. We have cause. Orc tracks lead near here. Near is not the same as to. My cottage has stone foundation and cleared land all around. You can see there are no orc tracks in my yard. Search the forest if you like, but my home is my own, and you will respect that or answer to the magistrate in Milford." The mercenary leader studied Julian with calculating eyes, weighing the cost of pushing the issue. Julian stared back, letting his old soldier's bearing show, the quiet confidence of a man who had stood in shield walls and stared down cavalry charges. He was alone and unarmed, but he was also a king's veteran on his own land, and that meant something in the eyes of the law. Not much, perhaps, but enough. "How long you been out here?" the mercenary asked. 3 years come spring. See anything strange? Smoke signals? Orc patrols?" "Nothing." "The clans stay in the high country mostly. Occasional trader comes through, but that is all." The mercenary grunted and turned to his men. "Fan out. Search the tree line. Look for blood, broken branches, anywhere she might be hiding." He looked back at Julian. "If you are lying to me, old soldier, I will find out. And I do not care about your veteran's rights when there is 1,000 gold crown bounty on the line." "I understand," Julian said calmly, "but I have told you the truth. I have seen no orcs." The mercenaries searched for over an hour, and Julian stood on his porch watching, maintaining the appearance of a man with nothing to hide. His heart hammered against his ribs, knowing that Shara lay hidden above, knowing that if they found her, everything would end in blood. But he kept his face calm and his posture relaxed, offering water from his well when the mercenaries grew thirsty, even making brief conversation about the weather and the quality of the hunting. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, the mercenary leader called his men back. "Tracks go cold near here. She must have backtracked, thrown us off the trail." "Orcs are clever," Julian agreed. "She probably doubled back miles ago. Maybe." The mercenary mounted his horse, still watching Julian with suspicion. "We will be searching this area for the next week. If you see anything, there is good gold for information." "I will keep my eyes open," Julian lied smoothly. They rode away, and Julian forced himself to wait, to not rush inside immediately. He went about his business, checking his wood supply, drawing water from the well, acting as he would on any normal day. Only when he was certain they were truly gone did he return inside and call softly for Shara. She emerged from the loft, and he saw the tension in her frame, the way her hands shook slightly with suppressed adrenaline. "You lied for me," she said. "Risked everything." "Yes." Julian closed the door and latched it, "and I would do it again." "Why? You owe me nothing." "We barely know each other." "I know enough." He moved closer, drawn by something he could no longer deny. "I know you question an unjust war. I know you sang me songs of your homeland. I know you split my firewood and helped with chores without being asked. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I have not felt since before the war, Julian." His name on her lips, spoken with something like wonder. "They will come back," he continued. "And when they do, we need to decide what happens next. You cannot stay hidden in my loft forever. They will search more carefully, perhaps bring dogs. We need a plan. I need to leave. Tonight, before they return, head deeper into the mountains. You need help. Someone who knows the trails, who can move without leaving tracks." Julian met her eyes. "Let me come with you." "What? No. This is your home, your life." "My life is a cottage in the woods where I hide from memories and wait to die." The words came out harsher than he intended, but they were true. "You asked me why I helped you. It is because when you walked through my door, you reminded me that I am still alive. That I can still do something that matters. Let me help you reach the mountains. Let me do this one good thing. It is madness. We will be hunted. You will lose everything. I have nothing to lose but this cottage, and I can build another." He took her hands in his, feeling the rightness of it. "Please, Shara, let me help you." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and he saw her walls crumbling, the fierce warrior revealing the woman beneath. "I do not want to be alone anymore." "Neither do I." They prepared through the afternoon, working with quiet efficiency. Julian packed supplies, food and blankets, and his medical kit. He gathered his old military gear from where it lay stored in the loft, the pack and bedroll and sturdy boots that had carried him through 8 years of war. He took his hunting bow and quiver, a long knife, and the sword from above the mantel, its blade still sharp despite years of disuse. Shara watched him arm himself, and something like relief crossed her face. "You are not just a healer." "I am a survivor," Julian said. "I learned to fight because I had to. I learned to heal for the same reason. I will do whatever is necessary to keep us alive." "Us." She tested the word. "I like the sound of that." They waited for full dark, then slipped away from the cottage into the forest. Julian led them north by northeast, away from the mercenary search patterns, using game trails and rocky ground that would hide their tracks. Shara moved beside him with the fluid grace of a predator, her night vision far superior to his. She guided him around obstacles he could barely see, her hand on his arm warm and steady. They traveled through the night, putting distance between themselves and the cottage. By dawn, they were miles away, deep in old-growth forest where the trees grew so thick that snow barely touched the ground. Julian found a hollow beneath a fallen giant, a natural shelter hidden by roots and undergrowth. They crawled inside and made camp, too tired to do more than eat cold rations before sleep claimed them. Julian woke to find himself wrapped around Shara, his arms encircling her waist, her back pressed against his chest. They had sought warmth in the cold, the practical necessities of survival, but it felt like more than that. It felt like belonging. He lay still, breathing in the scent of her, leather and smoke and something uniquely her, and allowed himself to feel the peace of the moment. She stirred, and he felt her awareness return. She could have pulled away, created distance, but instead she pressed closer, her hand covering his where it rested on her stomach. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning." He tightened his embrace slightly, a question and a promise. They lay like that as dawn light filtered through their shelter, neither wanting to break the spell. But eventually necessity drove them out, the need to move before the hunters could pick up their trail. They traveled for 5 days, always moving toward the high mountains that marked the edge of human lands. Julian used every trick he had learned in the army to hide their passage, walking in streams, backtracking, laying false trails. Shara used her knowledge of orcish tracking methods to anticipate where hunters would search, guiding them away from likely ambush points. On the 6th day, they heard hounds baying in the distance. The mercenaries had brought dogs, and the animals had found their scent. Julian and Shara ran, pushing themselves to exhaustion, but the hounds were tireless and the mercenaries well-mounted. By nightfall, they could hear the hunters crashing through the brush behind them, smell the smoke of their torches. "We cannot outrun them," Shara said as they paused on a ridge, looking back at the lights pursuing them. "Not on foot." "No," Julian agreed, "but we can choose the ground we fight on." They found a narrow defile where the ridge dropped into a ravine, a place where horses could not easily follow and attackers would have to come single file. Julian positioned them on the high ground. Arrows knocked, and they waited. The hounds came first, 3 massive dogs bred for hunting and killing. Shara dropped 2 with her throwing axes before they could close, and Julian shot the 3rd through the throat as it leaped for him. Then the mercenaries arrived, 6 men on foot, their mounts left below. The leader saw Julian and Shara on the ridge and smiled, cold and cruel. "The veteran is a traitor after all. There is bounty for harboring orcs, old soldier. You just made us very rich." "You have to take us alive for that bounty," Julian called back. "Come and try." They came, and Julian met them with the sword he had sworn never to draw again. The muscle memory returned instantly, 8 years of training and battle taking over. He parried and riposted, his blade finding flesh with terrible efficiency. Beside him, Shara fought with the brutal grace of an orcish warrior, her axes spinning and cutting, her strength overwhelming. 2 mercenaries fell to Julian's blade, another to Shara's axes. The remaining 3 retreated, reassessing the threat. "She is worth more alive," the leader shouted to his men. "But the traitor is worth nothing dead. Kill him. Take her." They rushed again, and this time Julian took a sword cut across his ribs, a shallow wound that burned like fire. He stumbled, and the mercenary pressed his advantage, but Shara was there, her axe taking the man in the shoulder, spinning him away. Julian recovered and drove his sword through the mercenary's chest, withdrawing the blade as the man collapsed. 2 left, including the leader. They had lost half their party, and the confidence had drained from their faces. They were mercenaries, not soldiers. They fought for gold, not honor, and there was no profit in dying on a cold ridge for a bounty they would not live to collect. "This is not worth it," one of them said, backing away. The leader snarled but recognized the truth. "Pull back. We will report their location and let the army deal with them." They retreated down the defile, leaving their dead behind. Julian and Shara did not pursue, too exhausted and wounded to risk another engagement. They gathered what supplies they could from the fallen, then continued into the mountains, knowing more would come but hoping distance and time would be on their side. Julian's wound was not deep, but it bled freely, and by the time they found shelter in a cave overlooking a frozen stream, he was dizzy with blood loss. Shara laid him down carefully and stripped away his torn shirt, exposing the long cut across his ribs. "You fought well," she said as she cleaned the wound with snow and cloth torn from her own shirt, "like a demon from the old stories." "I fought to protect you," Julian said through gritted teeth. "That is all the motivation I needed." She met his eyes, her hands gentle despite their strength. "You were wounded because of me. You have lost your home because of me. You have become a fugitive because of me. I lost nothing I cared about and gained everything that matters." He reached up and cupped her face, his palm against her cheek. "Do you not understand, Shara? I would do it all again. I would fight 100 mercenaries. I would walk through fire. Because somewhere between setting that plate and fleeing into the mountains, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the cold air between them, impossible and true. Shara's eyes widened, her tusks catching the dim light as her mouth opened in surprise. Then she was kissing him, fierce and desperate, her lips against his with a passion that took his breath. He kissed her back, ignoring the pain in his ribs, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I love you, Julian Harrow. You impossible, foolish, beautiful human, I love you." They held each other in the darkness of the cave, wounded and hunted but no longer alone. Julian felt something broken inside him begin to heal, the pieces of his shattered heart finding their way back together. Shara trembled in his arms, and he realized she was crying, silent tears tracking down her green skin. "I thought I would die alone," she said, "unmourned and forgotten, but you gave me hope, you gave me a future." "We will build it together," Julian promised. "Somewhere beyond the reach of mercenaries and kings. Somewhere we can just be ourselves." They rested through the night, taking turns keeping watch, ready to flee at the first sign of pursuit. But the mountains were silent except for the wind, and dawn found them alone. They pressed on, climbing higher into the peaks, following Shara's knowledge of orcish lands. On the 10th day since leaving Julian's cottage, they crossed a ridge and looked down into a valley that took Julian's breath. Stone halls were carved into the mountainsides, their entrances marked with elaborate carvings of orcish heroes and ancestors. Smoke rose from chimneys, and forge fires glowed in the depths. Fields terraced into the slopes showed the stubble of harvested crops, and flocks of mountain goats grazed on the higher meadows. It was beautiful and alien, a civilization built for strength and permanence, utterly unlike the human settlements Julian had known. "The Stormcrag clan," Shara said. "My mother's people before she married into Ironwood. They are isolationists, but they honor old bonds. If I can prove my lineage, they may grant us sanctuary. And if they do not, then we keep climbing until we find a clan that will, or until we find empty lands where we can build our own home." She took his hand and squeezed. Together, they descended into the valley, and orcish sentries challenged them before they reached the fields. Shara spoke in her own tongue, rapid and forceful, gesturing to herself, and then to Julian. The sentries looked skeptical, but one ran ahead to carry word to the clan elders. Shara and Julian were escorted to the main hall, a vast chamber carved from living rock, its ceiling supported by pillars that had been shaped rather than built. An elderly orc woman sat on a throne of stone, her tusks long and yellowed with age, her eyes sharp despite the wrinkles that lined her face. She studied Shara with interest, then turned her penetrating gaze on Julian. "You bring a human to Stormcrag," she said in heavily accented but clear human speech. "That is dangerous, child, foolish." "I bring the man I love, elder grandmother," Shara replied, using the formal title with respect. "I am Shara, daughter of Magra Imberdusk, who was born Magra of Stormcrag. I claim blood right to sanctuary. Your mother was my granddaughter. She left Stormcrag to join Ironwood and we did not approve, but blood is blood." The elder looked at Julian again. "Why would my granddaughter's daughter love a human? They are weak, short-lived, treacherous." "I love him because he saw an orc bleeding on his threshold and offered food instead of steel," Shara said. "Because he risked everything to protect me. Because he walked away from his home and his life to help me reach safety. Because he is brave and kind and sees me as a person, not a monster. I love her because she questions unjust wars and sings songs that make my heart ache," Julian added, his voice steady despite the dozens of orcish warriors watching from the shadows. "Because she is fierce and thoughtful in equal measure. Because when I am with her, I remember what it means to be alive." The elder was silent for a long moment, studying them both. Then she laughed, a deep booming sound that echoed off the stone walls. "You are either fools or prophets, and I am too old to know which. But you have courage, both of you, to stand here and speak of love when the world would rather see you dead." She rose from her throne with surprising grace. "I grant sanctuary to Shara of Imberdusk, blood of Stormcrag, and to Julian Harrow, who is her chosen. You may stay in our lands under our protection. But know this, human, if you betray my granddaughter's trust, if you bring harm to Stormcrag, I will feed you to the mountain wolves myself." "I would expect nothing less," Julian said with a slight bow. They were given a small dwelling carved into the mountainside, a single room with a hearth and sleeping platform, simple but comfortable. Orcish crafters brought them furs and blankets, cooking pots and tools, the basic necessities to begin a life. Shara's distant cousins came to meet her, curious about the exile who had returned with a human lover. Some were welcoming, others suspicious, but all respected the elder's decree of sanctuary. Julian and Shara settled into life in Stormcrag, learning its rhythms and customs. Julian offered his services as a healer, and orcs who had been injured or were sick began to seek him out, cautiously at first, then with growing trust as he proved his skill. Shara worked in the forges, her warrior's strength put to use shaping metal, learning the craft her people were famous for. Slowly, over weeks and then months, they built a life. Julian learned orcish words and customs, and Shara taught him to cook the foods of her people, spiced meats and hearty stews that sustained warriors through harsh winters. They explored the valleys and peaks together, finding hidden waterfalls and meadows where wildflowers bloomed in summer. They talked late into the night, sharing dreams and fears, building the foundation of a partnership that went deeper than passion. Spring came to the mountains, melting snow and bringing new growth. Julian and Shara stood on the ridge above their adopted home, looking out at the world below. Smoke from human settlements was visible in the far distance, a reminder of the lands Julian had left behind. But he felt no regret, no longing for what he had abandoned. His home was here now with Shara and the clan that had accepted them. "Do you miss it?" Shara asked, following his gaze. "Your old life, No, Julian said honestly. I miss nothing but the memories of people long dead. My life began the night you walked through my door. I was so certain I would die that night, bleeding and alone, hunted by men who saw me as nothing but a trophy. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. You saved my life in more ways than one. You saved mine as well. I was just too stubborn to realize I needed saving. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. Below, in Stormcrag, forge fires were being banked for the night and families were gathering for evening meals. Julian could hear the faint sound of orcish singing, the deep harmonies that seemed to resonate with the stone itself. Will you marry me? The words left Julian's mouth before he fully realized he had decided to speak them. I know human and orcish customs are different, and I know we are already committed, but I want to make it formal in whatever way your people recognize. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours. Shara turned to face him fully, her yellow eyes bright with emotion. Orcish marriage is simple. We exchange vows before the clan elders and the ancestors. We mix our blood and declare our bond. There is no going back once the vows are spoken. It is binding until death. That sounds perfect. You would truly do this. Bind yourself to an orc, knowing you can never return to human lands, knowing your own people would call you traitor and worse. I would do it gladly. You are my home now, Shara. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a promise and an answer. When they parted, she smiled, her tusks gleaming. Then yes, Julian Harrow, I will marry you. I will bind my life to yours before all the ancestors and gods, and I will love you until the mountains crumble and the stars fall from the sky. The wedding was held 3 days later, on the first full moon of spring. The clan gathered in the great hall, filling it with orcish warriors and crafters, elders and children. Shara wore traditional orcish marriage garb, leather and furs dyed deep red, with bone ornaments carved with protective symbols. Julian wore the best he had, his old military dress uniform that he had packed away years ago, cleaned and repaired for the occasion. They stood before the clan elder, who had painted her face with white ash and ochre, marking her role as witness to sacred vows. She spoke in Orcish, her voice carrying through the hall, and Shara translated softly for Julian. The ancestors watch. The mountains bear witness. 2 souls stand before us, seeking to become one. Let them speak their truth. Shara spoke first, her voice strong and clear. I, Shara Imberdusk, blood of Stormcrag, declare before all gathered that Julian Harrow is my chosen mate. I vow to stand with him in battle and in peace. I vow to honor his words and his wisdom. I vow to build a life with him and to love him until death takes me. Julian spoke his vows in Orcish, the words carefully practiced but no less heartfelt for being in a borrowed tongue. I, Julian Harrow, declare before all gathered that Shara Imberdusk is my chosen mate. I vow to stand with her in battle and in peace. I vow to honor her strength and her courage. I vow to build a life with her and to love her until death takes me. The elder produced a ceremonial knife, its blade etched with ancient symbols. She made shallow cuts on their palms, and Shara and Julian clasped hands, their blood mixing. The elder bound their joined hands with red cord, speaking words of blessing and binding. By blood and by word, by mountain and by moon, I declare you married. 2 made one, bound until death. May the ancestors smile upon your union. May your hearth be warm and your table full. May your children be strong and your love be eternal. The clan erupted in cheers and stamping feet, the sound echoing off the stone like thunder. Shara and Julian kissed, their bound hands pressed between them, and Julian felt a completeness that he had never known before. This was right. This was home. The celebration lasted through the night, with feasting and drinking, singing and dancing. Julian was pulled into orcish circle dances, taught the steps by laughing warriors who seemed delighted by his awkwardness. Shara glowed with joy, her face alight with happiness as she moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes. They were together, married, bound before all who mattered. The world outside could rage and war, but here in the mountains they had found peace. As the celebration wound down and guests began to drift back to their own homes, Julian and Shara returned to their dwelling. It had been decorated in their absence, the hearth banked with fresh coals, the sleeping platform piled with new furs and blankets. Flowers were scattered on the floor, mountain blooms that would have taken hours to gather. The clan had welcomed Julian fully, and this was their gift, acceptance and blessing. Shara closed the door and turned to face Julian, suddenly shy in a way he had never seen from her. "I never thought I would have this. Marriage, a home, someone who loves me. Neither did I." Julian moved closer, cupping her face in his hands. "But I am grateful for every moment that led us here, every choice, every hardship, every step that brought you to my door." They came together with tenderness and passion, two people who had found in each other what they had not known they needed. The night was filled with whispered words and gentle touches, with the exploration of two souls learning each other's rhythms. Julian traced the scars on Shara's skin, each one a story, a moment of survival. She ran her fingers through his hair, memorizing the feel of him, the warmth of his body against hers. When they finally slept, wrapped in each other's arms, it was with the deep contentment of people who had found their place in the world. Morning would bring new challenges, new days to navigate as a married couple in a culture that was still learning to accept their union. But for now, in the darkness of their mountain home, they were simply Julian and Shara, two people who had chosen each other against all odds. Spring turned to summer, and Julian and Shara built their life together with care and intention. Julian's reputation as a healer grew, and he found himself teaching young orcs the basics of field medicine, combining human techniques with orcish remedies. Shara became a respected forge master, her blades sought after for their balance and edge. They worked side by side in their dwelling, preparing meals, maintaining their home, falling into the comfortable patterns of domestic life. There were challenges, of course. Some orcs remained suspicious of Julian, questioning why he had been allowed into Stormcrag. A few young warriors tested him, picking fights to prove he was weak, but Julian met their challenges with the skill he had learned in the king's army. He did not seek to dominate or humiliate, but he made it clear he could defend himself and Shara. Gradually, even the skeptics began to accept him. News from the lowlands sometimes reached the mountains, carried by traders or scouts. The war between humans and orcs continued, battles fought over the same territories that had been contested for generations. Neither side was winning, both were bleeding, and Julian felt sick thinking about the young men and orcs dying for causes they likely did not understand. He and Shara spoke often about how to end the cycle, how to build bridges between their peoples, but the solutions were not simple. "We are a start," Shara said one evening as they sat outside their dwelling, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "One human and one orc, proving that peace is possible. Perhaps others will follow our example." "Perhaps," Julian agreed. "But change is slow, and people fear what they do not understand. Then we must help them understand. We must show them that love is stronger than hate, that compassion is braver than violence." Julian looked at his wife, fierce and beautiful in the starlight, and felt pride swell in his chest. She had grown since their first meeting, transformed from an exiled warrior into a visionary. She spoke at clan gatherings now, advocating for peace with nearby human settlements for trade instead of raids. Not all listened, but some did, and that was enough to plant seeds. Summer faded into autumn, and Shara told Julian she was pregnant. The news filled him with joy and terror in equal measure. A child, half human and half orc, would face challenges neither of them could fully anticipate. But it would also be a symbol of hope, proof that their peoples could come together in ways that created life instead of taking it. "Are you afraid?" Shara asked, her hand resting on her stomach where their child grew. "Terrified," Julian admitted, "but also happier than I have ever been. We will face whatever comes together." "Together," she echoed and kissed him. The pregnancy was difficult, Shara's orcish constitution warring with the human part of their child. Julian attended her constantly, using every bit of medical knowledge he possessed to keep her comfortable and healthy. The clan rallied around them, elder women offering advice and assistance, warriors standing guard to ensure Shara could rest without worry. Julian saw the depth of their acceptance in those months, the way Stormcrag had truly made them part of the community. When Shara went into labor on a cold winter night, Julian was beside her, holding her hand, speaking words of encouragement. The birth was long and hard, and there were moments when Julian feared he would lose her, but she was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known. As dawn broke over the mountains, their daughter was born, screaming and healthy with green-tinted skin and her father's brown eyes. "She is perfect," Shara whispered, cradling their daughter against her chest. "What should we name her?" Julian thought of all they had been through, all they had overcome. He thought of the hearth where their journey began, the plate he had set for a stranger who became his wife. "Ember," he said. "Let us call her Ember, for the fire that brought us together and the warmth of home." "Ember Harrow Emberdusk," Shara said, testing the name. "Yes, it suits her." They raised Ember in the mountains, teaching her both human and orcish ways. She grew strong and clever, learning to forge metal from her mother and to heal injuries from her father. The clan adored her, the first child of mixed heritage born in Stormcrag, and she moved between worlds with the ease of someone who had never been taught to see them as separate. Years passed, marked by the turning seasons and the growth of their daughter. Julian's hair began to gray and Shara's tusks grew longer, but their love remained constant. They had built something that mattered, not just a life but a legacy. Other mixed couples began to appear, emboldened by Julian and Shara's example. Trade routes opened between Stormcrag and nearby human settlements, tentative at first but growing stronger. The war had not ended, would not end in their lifetimes, but pockets of peace spread like wildflowers through cracks in stone. Small victories, perhaps, but victories nonetheless. And it had all begun with a simple choice, made on a stormy night when an orc woman walked into a human's home, and he set another plate instead of reaching for his sword. Julian and Shara often told their story to Ember, wanting her to understand where she came from and what her parents had sacrificed to give her a future. She listened with wide eyes, asking questions about the cottage in the forest and the flight through the mountains, about the wedding ceremony and the early days of their marriage. "You were brave," Ember said one evening, sitting between her parents by the hearth. She was 10 years old now, tall for her age and showing signs of the strength she had inherited from both bloodlines. "We were desperate," Shara corrected gently. "Desperation sometimes looks like bravery." "No," Julian said, pulling his daughter close. "Your mother is wrong, we were brave. It takes courage to choose compassion over fear, love over hate. We were brave, and so are you, little Ember. You carry the best of both our peoples in your veins." Ember smiled, her small tusks showing, and snuggled deeper into the warmth of her family. Julian looked at Shara over their daughter's head, and they shared a look of perfect understanding. This was what they had fought for, what they had sacrificed for. Not grand political change or the end of all wars, but simply this: a child who did not have to choose between her heritage, a family built on love, a hearth where all were welcome. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the winter season. Inside, the fire burned warm and bright, casting dancing shadows on stone walls. Julian added another log to the hearth, tending the flames as he had done countless times since Shara had first walked into his life. The ritual was comforting, a reminder of all they had built together. "Tell us another story," Ember asked sleepily, her eyes beginning to close. "What story would you like?" Shara asked, stroking their daughter's dark hair. "The one about the plate. The very beginning." Julian and Shara exchanged smiles, and he began to speak, his voice soft and warm. "It was a night of storms, and I was alone in my cottage, eating dinner by the fire. Then she walked in, your mother, covered in rain and blood, and I knew my life was about to change forever. She could have killed me, could have taken what she needed and left me dead on the floor. But instead she just stood there, swaying with exhaustion, claiming my hearth as hers with nothing but her presence. And I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who needed help. So I set another plate, and I offered her food, and everything that came after grew from that single choice." "The choice to be kind," Ember murmured. "Yes, little one. The choice to be kind even when the world says you should be cruel. That is the most important lesson we can teach you." Ember drifted off to sleep between them, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, that she belonged. Julian and Shara sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter sleep, marveling at the life they had created. The path had not been easy, but it had been worth every hardship, every sacrifice. "You ever regret it?" Shara asked quietly. "Leaving your old life behind?" "Never," Julian said without hesitation. "That cottage was just a place where I existed. This is a home where I live. There is a world of difference. I love you, Julian Harrow." "I love you, Shara Emberdusk. Thank you for walking through my door. Thank you for giving me a reason to set another plate." They sat together as the fire burned low and the snow piled high outside. A family bound by love and choice, proof that even in a world divided by war and prejudice, compassion could prevail. The future was uncertain, the path forward unclear, but they would walk it together, and that was enough. Years continued to pass, and Julian watched his daughter grow into a remarkable young woman. Ember had inherited her mother's warrior spirit and her father's healing touch, becoming both fierce and gentle in equal measure. She was a bridge between worlds, accepted by the Orcish clans and curious about the human settlements she had never seen. Julian knew that eventually she would want to explore beyond the mountains, to see the lands where her father had been born. That day came when Ember was 17, on the cusp of adulthood by both human and Orcish standards. She approached her parents one evening as they prepared dinner, her expression serious. "I want to visit the human lands," she said without preamble. "I want to see where Father came from, to understand that part of my heritage." Julian and Shara exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in a heartbeat. They had known this moment would come, had prepared for it as best they could. But knowing and experiencing were different things, and Julian felt his heart clench with worry. "It will be dangerous," Shara said carefully. "Humans may not accept you. They may see only your Orcish features and react with fear or violence. I know. But I need to try. I need to know if the peace you have built here can extend beyond these mountains." Ember looked at her father. "Will you come with me? Show me your world. Julian thought of his old cottage, abandoned years ago, likely reclaimed by the forest or occupied by some other hermit. He thought of the towns and villages where he had grown up, where hatred of orcs was taught from childhood. It would be risky, possibly deadly, but he understood his daughter's need. She was seeking to understand herself, to integrate the two halves of her identity. How could he deny her that? "Yes," he said, "I will take you. But we will need to be careful, plan our route, avoid areas where the war is most active." They prepared for the journey over the following weeks, gathering supplies and information. The clan elder blessed their travels, and Shara made them weapons and armor, lightweight but strong. She would not come with them, her orcish features too distinctive, but she helped prepare them for every contingency. "Bring her back safe," Shara said to Julian the night before they were to leave, holding him close. "Both of you come back to me." "I promise," Julian said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. The journey down from the mountains took several days, and Julian felt strange returning to lands he had left behind so many years ago. The forest had changed, trails overgrown or redirected, but his memory guided them true. They avoided main roads, traveling through wilderness, approaching human civilization gradually. Ember was fascinated by everything, studying plants and animals she had only heard about in stories, marveling at the differences from her mountain home. Julian watched her with pride and protectiveness, hyper-aware of every sound, every potential threat. They reached a small frontier town on a market day, when the population swelled with farmers and traders from the surrounding area. Julian had chosen the location carefully, a place far from the active war zones, where people were more concerned with survival than politics. They entered carefully, Ember wearing a hooded cloak that concealed her features, Julian scanning the crowd for danger. At first, no one paid them special attention. They were just another traveler and his companion browsing the market stalls. But then Ember's hood slipped, revealing her green-tinted skin and small tusks, and gasps rippled through the crowd. Julian stepped closer to his daughter, ready to defend her, but what happened next surprised him. An old woman approached, her face weathered by years of hard work. She looked at Ember with curiosity rather than fear, studying her features carefully. "You are the child of two worlds," the old woman said. "Human and orc mixed together. I thought such a thing was impossible." "It is possible," Ember said with quiet dignity. "My father is human. My mother is orc. I am both and neither, and I am proud of my heritage. Are there others like you?" The old woman asked. "A few, in the mountains where I was raised. More every year, as humans and orcs learn that we are not so different." A crowd had gathered now, people pressing close to see the strange girl. Julian kept his hand on his sword hilt, watching for weapons, for violence. But what he saw instead was wonder, curiosity, even hope. These were people ground down by decades of war, tired of losing sons and daughters to battles that never ended. The sight of a child born of both peoples was novelty, yes, but also possibility. "Tell us about the mountains," a young man called out. "Is it true that orcs live in stone halls, that they forge weapons that never break?" Ember smiled and began to speak, and Julian watched as his daughter became a storyteller, weaving tales of orcish culture and human kindness, of her parents' unlikely love and the clan that had accepted them. She spoke of peace built one relationship at a time, of trade and cooperation, of the possibility of a future where humans and orcs were allies rather than enemies. Not everyone was convinced. Some in the crowd muttered about monsters and unnatural unions, about the dangers of trusting orcs. But others listened with genuine interest, asking questions, imagining a different way. Julian saw seeds being planted, the same seeds he and Shara had planted years ago in Stormcrag, taking root in new soil. They stayed in the town for 3 days, and Ember became a minor celebrity, the half-orc girl who bridged worlds. She was invited to speak at the town hall, where she told her parents' story and answered questions about orcish culture. The town leaders were cautious but intrigued, discussing the possibility of sending a trade delegation to Stormcrag, testing the waters of peace. On their last night, a young woman approached them at the inn where they were staying. She was perhaps 20, with the calloused hands of a craftswoman and eyes that held determination. "I am a potter," she said. "I make vessels and tiles, things of beauty and function. I have heard that orcish clans have techniques for firing ceramics that create colors we cannot achieve. Would they teach me, do you think? If I came in peace with respect, I believe they would," Ember said warmly. "My mother's clan values craft and skill. They would welcome a human artisan who came to learn rather than to conquer. Then I will come. When you return to the mountains, I will come with you." "And I," said a voice from the corner. A young man stepped forward, a healer's bag slung over his shoulder. "I am a physician, trained in the capital. If you say that humans and orcs are not so different, then our medicines might work on both peoples. I want to learn orcish remedies, to share knowledge." Others stepped forward, a blacksmith curious about orcish forging techniques, a farmer who had heard that mountain crops were hardy and wanted seeds, a scholar who wished to study orcish written language. Within an hour, a small delegation had formed, a dozen humans willing to risk the journey to Stormcrag, to see if peace was truly possible. Julian felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his daughter coordinate this new beginning, her enthusiasm and sincerity winning over people who had been raised to fear her mother's kind. This was what they had hoped for, what they had dreamed of during all those long years in the mountains. Not a dramatic end to the war, but small bridges built by ordinary people willing to see past their differences. They returned to Stormcrag with their delegation in tow, and the clan elders were skeptical at first. But Ember vouched for the humans, and Julian's reputation carried weight. The visitors were given a trial period, allowed to live in the clan and learn, monitored carefully but treated with respect. The potter was apprenticed to master ceramicists. The healer worked with Julian in the clan infirmary. The blacksmith joined Shara at the forges. Not all the visitors stayed. Some found the cultural differences too vast, the living conditions too harsh. But most did, and they became bridges themselves, writing letters to friends and family in human lands, spreading word of what they had discovered. More came, a trickle at first, then a steady stream. Other orcish clans, seeing Stormcrag's success, opened their own doors to human visitors. Human settlements that had only known orcs as enemies began to see them as potential trading partners. The war did not end, not for many years. But it began to lose its grip, becoming a conflict maintained by old generals and conservative nobles rather than the will of the people. Young humans and orcs who met in mixed communities, who learned each other's languages and customs, found it harder to hate on command. They asked questions their parents had never thought to ask. They built friendships that transcended species. Julian and Shara watched it all unfold from their home in Stormcrag, now surrounded by a community that was truly mixed, human and orc living side by side. They had grown old together, Julian's hair completely white now, Shara's tusks long and wise. But their love had never faded, strengthened instead by all they had weathered together. Ember had married, choosing a human man from one of the lowland towns, a carpenter who had come to Stormcrag to learn orcish woodworking techniques. They had given Julian and Shara grandchildren, beautiful babies with varying degrees of green skin and human features, each one unique and precious. The family gathered often around Julian and Shara's hearth, 3 generations united by love and choice. On a spring evening, as Julian and Shara sat outside their home watching the sun set over the mountains, their grandchildren playing in the meadow below, Julian reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "You remember the night we met?" he asked, though he knew she did. They had told the story countless times to their daughter, to their grandchildren, to anyone who would listen. "Every detail," Shara said, leaning against him. "The storm, the pain, the fear. And then you, calmly setting another plate like I was an expected guest rather than an intruder. I did not know what else to do. You needed help, so I helped. It was more than that. You saw me as a person when your world told you to see a monster. That simple act of recognition changed everything." "We changed everything," Julian corrected. "You and I together. We proved that love is possible even when the world says it is not. We built bridges that others could cross. But it started with you having the courage to walk through my door and me having the wisdom to welcome you." "A plate set for a stranger," Shara said softly. "Such a small thing to spark a revolution. All revolutions start with small things. One kindness, one choice, one person deciding to act differently than expected." Julian took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I would do it all again, Shara. Every hardship, every danger, every moment of doubt, all of it led us here to this life, to this family. I have no regrets." "Neither do I," Shara said. "You were my salvation when I thought I had none. You gave me hope when I had resigned myself to death. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You are my heart, Julian Harrow. You have been since the night you invited me to your hearth." They kissed as the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in brilliant hues. Below, their grandchildren called out in play, their laughter mixing human and orcish sounds in perfect harmony. Somewhere in the valley, forge fires were being lit and dinner was being prepared in dozens of homes, human and orc families going about the business of living side by side. It was not perfect. There were still prejudices, still misunderstandings and conflicts. The war continued in distant lands, though even there, deserters from both sides were finding their way to places like Stormcrag, seeking peace. Change was slow, measured in generations rather than years. But it was real, and it was growing, and it had all begun with one simple act of compassion. Julian and Shara stood eventually, heading inside as the evening chill descended. Their hearth was warm, the fire burning bright, and the table was set for the family dinner that would soon fill their home with voices and warmth. As Julian stirred the pot of stew hanging over the flames, he thought of that first meal he had served Shara, how uncertain and strange that night had been. Now it was familiar and beautiful, a routine built on love and trust. He set plates for his family, counting heads in his mind, making sure there was enough for everyone. There would always be enough, he thought. His hearth would always welcome those who needed it. His table would always have room for one more, because that was the lesson he and Shara had learned and lived. When you open your door to someone in need, when you set a plate for a stranger, you are not just offering food and shelter. You are offering recognition, dignity, the acknowledgement that their life has value. You are saying that they matter, that they belong, that there is space in this world for them. Such a simple thing, such a profound thing, and it could change everything. The family arrived in a boisterous rush, Ember and her husband and the grandchildren filling the small home with noise and energy. They gathered around the table, crowding close, passing bowls and sharing stories of their day. Julian looked around at the faces surrounding him. human and orc and everything in between, united by bonds of blood and choice. This was his legacy, not glory on a battlefield or wealth in a vault, but this: a family that proved peace was possible, a home where all were welcome, a hearth that burned bright with love. It was more than he had ever dreamed of during his lonely years in the forest, more than he had thought possible during the dark days of war. Shara caught his eye from across the table and smiled, and Julian felt his heart overflow with gratitude. She had walked into his life on a stormy night, claiming his hearth as hers, and he had set another plate. That single choice had blossomed into this beautiful, complicated, joyful life. As dinner continued and conversation flowed, Julian allowed himself to feel the full weight of their accomplishment. They had not ended the war single-handedly or transformed the world overnight, but they had created ripples that became waves, had planted seeds that grew into forests. They had shown that another way was possible, and people had followed their example, building on what they had started. The evening wound down eventually, the grandchildren growing sleepy, the adults ready to return to their own homes. Hugs and kisses were exchanged at the door, promises made to gather again soon. Julian and Shara stood in the doorway, waving as their family disappeared into the night, then closed the door and turned to face each other. "Another good day," Shara said, beginning to clear the table. "Another blessing," Julian agreed, helping her. They worked together in comfortable silence, the rhythms of their partnership so ingrained that they moved like one being. When the cottage was clean and the fire banked for the night, they climbed into bed, Shara curling into Julian's arms with a sigh of contentment. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Julian replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Until the mountains crumble and the stars fall from the sky." "And beyond," Shara added. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's warmth, two people who had defied the odds and built something extraordinary from a single act of kindness. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and the stars wheeled overhead, bearing witness to their love. Inside, the hearth glowed with banked coals, ready to spring back to life with the morning, a symbol of hope that would never be extinguished. The story of Julian and Shara spread far beyond Stormcrag, becoming legend even while they lived. Bards sang of the human hermit and the orcish warrior, the plate set at the table, the love that bridged worlds. Children grew up hearing their tale, learning that kindness was powerful, that love could overcome hatred, that peace was possible if people were brave enough to reach for it. And in quiet cottages and stone halls across the land, whenever a stranger appeared at the door, whenever someone in need asked for help, people remembered Julian and Shara. They thought of that stormy night and the simple choice to set another plate. And sometimes, just sometimes, they made the same choice, opening their doors and their hearts, creating their own ripples that would spread in ways they could not imagine. Because that is how change happens, not through grand gestures or dramatic battles, but through small acts of compassion repeated over and over until they become culture, until they become truth. Julian and Shara knew this, had lived this, and had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They lived long lives, long enough to see the war officially end, treaties signed by kings and chieftains who had grown tired of fighting. They lived long enough to see mixed communities sprout across the borderlands, humans and orcs learning to be neighbors instead of enemies. They lived long enough to see their grandchildren have children of their own, a fourth generation carrying their legacy forward. And when they finally passed, within months of each other as longtime partners often do, they were mourned by both humans and orcs, laid to rest in a place of honor overlooking the valley they had helped transform. Their story was carved into stone, preserving it for future generations, a reminder of what was possible when people chose love over fear. But their true monument was not stone or song. It was the world they had helped create, the bridges they had built, the lives they had touched. It was every mixed family that did not have to hide, every friendship that crossed species lines, every act of kindness extended to someone different. It was the knowledge, passed down through generations, that peace was possible, that understanding could triumph over prejudice, that love was stronger than hate. And it all began with one simple choice, made on a stormy night in a small cottage on the edge of the wilderness. An orc woman walked in and claimed his hearth as hers. He simply set another plate, and from that moment, everything changed.